It's not one thing, it was many things. But I did not like that he'd had meetings with Jeffrey Epstein. He was evil personified. I had nightmares about it afterwards.
For nearly 3 decades, Melinda French Gates stood beside one of the most powerful men on the planet, smiling for cameras and protecting a carefully built image. Then she walked away. And after the divorce, she stopped staying quiet. In interviews, books, and rare public moments, Melinda finally revealed what was really happening behind closed doors with Bill Gates. And what she exposed changed everything people thought they knew. Keep watching, because what she revealed shocked the world. Raised on discipline, not privilege. Melinda Ann French was born on August 15, 1964, in Dallas, Texas, far removed from the billion-dollar institutions she would one day help lead. Her childhood unfolded in a household defined by structure, expectations, and shared responsibility, where curiosity was encouraged, but discipline was non-negotiable. Her father was an aerospace engineer whose work contributed to the Apollo missions, helping send Americans to the moon, and precision was simply a way of life in his world. Planning mattered, details mattered, and those values shaped the household. Her mother stayed home and set the rhythm of family life, creating a sense of stability built on routines, values, and quiet accountability. They lived comfortably, but never extravagantly, and Melinda grew up understanding that security did not come from excess, but from preparation. As the second of 4 children, she watched her parents plan carefully for the future, especially when it came to education. College would be expensive, and opportunity had to be earned. So in the late 1970s, her father began buying rental properties as a way to ensure that all 4 children would one day be able to attend university. What began as a financial plan quickly became a family effort. By the time Melinda was 10 years old, weekends meant painting walls, scrubbing floors, and cleaning apartments between tenants. And by 12, she was helping with basic bookkeeping, balancing numbers most children her age had never encountered. No one framed these experiences as lessons, but the lessons landed anyway. Responsibility felt lighter when everyone shared it, and independence was not something you claimed, but something you built through effort. Each apartment cleaned represented tuition saved later, and each ledger balanced showed her how planning created possibility. Without lectures or speeches, she learned that security came from competence and that freedom was earned through discipline. Those ideas rooted themselves deeply and followed her as she moved into her teenage years, quietly shaping the way she would approach every major decision in her life. Around that same time, something arrived in the French household that would quietly alter Melinda's path forever. In 1977, her father brought home an Apple II computer, a rare sight in most homes and an object that instantly captured her attention. At 14, she began using it to track rental records, and the slow blinking cursor pulled her in completely. She started teaching herself how to code, typing commands again and again, experimenting until simple programs responded to her ideas. At a time when very few girls were encouraged to touch technology, she found comfort in the machine's indifference. It did not care about her age or her gender. It responded only to logic, clarity, and persistence, and she loved that. Hours disappeared as she wrote small scripts to solve practical problems, and through that process, she began to feel that technology could bring order to complexity and clarity to chaos. That feeling stayed with her, growing stronger as she enrolled at Ursuline Academy in 1978, a school known for its academic rigor and one of the first in Texas to introduce computers into the classroom. There, she gravitated toward math and science, finding computer science both intimidating and exhilarating. and each project pushed her deeper into a field that already felt familiar. When she graduated in 1982 as valedictorian, she carried more than top grades with her. She carried a quiet confidence that technology would shape the future, and a certainty that she wanted to be part of building it, learning to compete in a world not built for her. When Melinda arrived at Duke University in 1982, every lesson from her childhood came with her, though nothing fully prepared her for what she encountered inside those classrooms. She entered as a bright, disciplined student with a deep love for technology, but quickly found herself in an environment where confidence was often louder than competence and where she was frequently one of the only women in the room. In her early computer science classes, male students shouted out answers with ease, sometimes interrupting lectures with an unshaken certainty that made the space feel competitive rather than collaborative. The energy was different from anything she had experienced before, and in one of her first courses, the professor introduced a programming language she had never seen. For a moment, doubt crept in. She wondered whether she truly belonged there or whether she had misjudged her own abilities. But the doubt did not last long. Instead of retreating, she leaned in harder. She studied longer hours, asked sharper questions, and learned faster than she ever had before. Each challenge became fuel rather than friction, and over time, she realized that confidence could be built just like any other skill, through repetition, discipline, and results. The pressure that once felt intimidating slowly became familiar, even motivating. By 1986, she completed her bachelor's degree in computer science and economics, and only a year later, at just 23 years old, she earned her MBA. Those 5 years at Duke taught her how to compete in environments that did not naturally make space for women, how to trust her own judgment even when surrounded by louder voices, and how to hold her ground without becoming hardened by it. Long after graduation, she would return to Duke as a board trustee from 1996 to 2003, closing the loop on a place that had tested and sharpened her in equal measure. Alongside her studies, Melinda spent her summers at IBM, where she was exposed to the inner workings of a massive technology corporation. The work was demanding, structured, and methodical, and she absorbed everything she could, learning how large teams collaborated, how complex software systems came together piece by piece, and how corporate decisions rippled across entire organizations. For a young woman in the early 1980s, those internships were rare opportunities, and she understood their value. She learned multimedia tools, sharpened her coding strategies, and developed a deep respect for teamwork and execution. Living frugally in dorms during those summers, she imagined where this world of technology might take her, and for the first time, she could see multiple futures unfolding in front of her. After her second IBM internship, she received a full-time job offer. It was the safe path, the obvious choice, the one her parents and professors would have supported without hesitation. IBM was stable, respected, and powerful, and the career trajectory was clear. Accepting the offer would have guaranteed comfort. But during her final interview, something unexpected happened. Her hiring manager encouraged her to consider another company, one that was smaller, riskier, and far less established at the time. That company was Microsoft. The suggestion unsettled her. Moving to Seattle felt daunting, and starting over in a younger company with big ambitions but fewer guarantees did not feel safe. Yet the idea lingered. She had never been drawn to comfort for its own sake. What she wanted was growth. So in 1987, she turned down IBM and chose Microsoft instead, a decision she would later describe as the moment everything changed. Building power quietly inside Microsoft. Melinda arrived at Microsoft in August 1987 as a 23-year-old product manager with a fresh MBA and a quiet determination to contribute something meaningful. She was not loud, flashy, or interested in attention, but she understood systems, people, and execution, and those skills quickly set her apart. Her early work focused on multimedia products, a frontier that was still new and largely undefined. One of her first major projects was Cinemania, a movie guide released on CD-ROM in 1992 that blended film clips, trivia, cast information, and interactive features in ways most users had never seen before. The product sold more than 200,000 copies in its first year, proving that digital entertainment could be both functional and engaging. That success opened doors, and soon after, she led the team behind Encarta, a digital encyclopedia launched in 1993 that would become one of Microsoft's most influential consumer products. Encarta combined text, photos, audio, and video into a single interactive experience, and by 1995, it had sold over 1 million copies worldwide. Families used it for homework, schools adopted it for classrooms, and computers across the globe carried a product shaped by her leadership. Alongside these wins came failures, most notably Microsoft Bob, an ambitious attempt to make computers more approachable through a virtual house interface. The idea was ahead of its time, but the hardware wasn't ready, and the product struggled before being discontinued. Rather than derailing her, the experience taught her how to absorb failure without internalizing it, and how to keep pushing bold ideas even when outcomes were uncertain. By the early 1990s, she had risen to General Manager of Information Products, leading teams of more than 100 people, and helping push Microsoft's multimedia market share close to 90%. Her influence grew quietly but steadily, and her decisions shaped software used daily in millions of homes. During this same period, something personal was unfolding behind the scenes. In 1987, she and Bill Gates began dating, keeping their relationship private due to workplace rules. For 3 years, they built a partnership grounded in shared curiosity and intellectual respect, and on January 1, 1994, they married on the island of Lanai in Hawaii in a small ceremony with just a handful of guests. She entered that marriage with intention and independence, negotiating a strong prenuptial agreement that ensured she would be an equal partner. It was a quiet but powerful signal, one that reflected the same self-assured discipline she had carried since childhood. By 1996, Melinda stood at another crossroads. She was 32 years old, running massive teams inside one of the most competitive companies in the world, and preparing to start a family. She could continue climbing higher, or she could step away and redefine what success looked like. She chose to leave Microsoft. That decision closed a 9-year chapter in which she had helped shape the consumer face of one of the world's most powerful companies and opened the door to a new life that would eventually pull her toward philanthropy, power, and a reckoning no one could yet foresee: building a global empire of giving. When Melinda stepped away from Microsoft in 1996, it did not feel like an ending so much as a quiet pivot. She had already accumulated enormous wealth through stock options as Microsoft's share price soared, and she suddenly had something few people ever receive so early in life: the freedom to choose what mattered next. Rather than retreat into private life or focus solely on raising her children, she began redirecting her energy toward a different kind of system, one built not around software or markets, but around people. The philanthropic work did not begin with a grand announcement. In 1994, Melinda and Bill created a modest entity called the William H. Gates Foundation, initially focused on health and education. It was followed by the Gates Library Foundation and the Gates Learning Foundation, each addressing different gaps they believed technology and education could help close. In August 1999, those efforts were merged into a single institution that carried both of their names, creating what would become the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. At launch, the foundation's endowment stood at roughly $17 billion, mostly in Microsoft stock. A staggering sum, even by the standards of large nonprofits. In January 2000, Bill added another $5 billion, instantly transforming the foundation into a force capable of reshaping entire systems, rather than simply funding isolated projects. With that scale came a new philosophy, one that reflected Melinda's background in technology and execution. Giving, she believed, should be measured, evaluated, and refined, just like software. Even before most households had reliable internet access, Melinda was thinking about who would be left behind. In the mid-1990s, she supported an initiative known as Libraries Online, which placed computers and internet access into public libraries across the United States. Between 1995 and 1997, the effort delivered millions of dollars in software and support to hundreds of libraries. And by 2000, more than 10,000 libraries had benefited. For many low-income families, seniors, and students, those machines represented their first interaction with the digital world, and Melinda saw firsthand how access could change lives. As the foundation expanded, so did its ambitions. By the late 1990s, it was funding scholarships for minority students, supporting education reform in the Pacific Northwest, and experimenting with new models for improving public schools. One notable gift was a $10 billion scholarship program at the University of Washington, created in honor of Bill's mother, Mary Gates, reinforcing Melinda's belief that education remained one of the most powerful levers for long-term change. Then, Africa changed everything. On trips to countries such as Zambia and Tanzania in the late 1990s, Melinda encountered realities that statistics alone could not convey. She walked through understaffed clinics, met mothers who had lost children to preventable diseases, and saw families travel hours for basic medical care. The experience left her shaken and deeply resolved. From that point forward, global health would sit at the center of the Foundation's work. Under her guidance, the Foundation committed hundreds of millions of dollars to vaccination campaigns, maternal health programs, and family planning initiatives in regions with the highest child mortality rates. Over time, those commitments would save millions of lives. Between 2000 and 2015, the Foundation grew into a global powerhouse, fueled not only by Gates's own wealth, but also by major contributions such as Warren Buffett's historic pledge of roughly $30 billion in 2006. By 2015, the Foundation's endowment had risen above $50 billion, and it had spent more than $53 billion on health, education, and development. One of the clearest examples of its impact came through the fight against polio. Working with global partners, the Foundation helped vaccinate more than 100 million children across countries, including Pakistan and India. In Pakistan, annual polio cases dropped by more than 90% between the mid-1990s and 2015, and in India, the disease was declared eradicated in 2014. These were not abstract wins. They were children spared paralysis, families spared lifelong hardship, and communities given a chance to move forward. Women's health became another defining focus of Melinda's work. Between 2009 and 2015, she backed more than $1 billion in contraception programs across Africa and Asia, helping expand access to modern family planning methods in underserved urban areas. In places like Kenya, contraceptive use among married women rose sharply, exceeding government targets and contributing to dramatic reductions in maternal deaths and unintended pregnancies. At the same time, she began speaking more openly in the United States about paid family leave, caregiving, and policies that would allow women to stay in the workforce without sacrificing their health or independence. The recognition followed. In 2016, Melinda and Bill received the Presidential Medal of Freedom from President Barack Obama, the highest civilian honor in the United States, acknowledging decades of philanthropic impact. France awarded her the Legion of Honor for her contributions to global health and development, marking her influence well beyond American borders. The awards were symbolic, but they confirmed something undeniable. A woman who had once quietly shipped software from a cubicle was now shaping policy, funding global systems, and influencing how the world approached health and inequality. Yet even as her public influence expanded, Melinda was building something separate, something entirely her own. In 2015, she launched Pivotal Ventures, a firm designed to accelerate progress for women and families by investing in ideas, organizations, and policies often overlooked by traditional power structures. Through Pivotal, she backed initiatives in mental health, caregiving, economic security, politics, and women in technology and media, guided by a simple belief that when women gain power and resources, societies move faster and fairer. To the outside world, the story looked like one of uninterrupted ascent. Wealth, influence, recognition, and a marriage that appeared stable and united at the top of global philanthropy. But beneath that surface, tensions were forming, shaped by power, culture, and a growing awareness that the values she championed publicly were becoming harder to reconcile privately. Those tensions would soon force Melinda to confront a question she could no longer avoid: whether the life she had helped build still aligned with the boundaries she believed in. Cracks behind closed doors. From the outside, Melinda's life appeared orderly, powerful, and intact. But inside the marriage, tensions had been quietly accumulating for years. Power has a way of distorting relationships, especially when one partner's influence stretches across governments, industries, and continents. As the foundation grew and Bill's public stature expanded, Melinda found herself increasingly aware of behaviors that conflicted with the values she publicly championed. Working inside male-dominated environments had already taught her how easily power could blur boundaries, and she had seen enough during her years in technology to know that silence often protected the wrong people. Over time, she began to notice patterns, small moments that felt off, stories that did not quite align, and explanations that came too late or not at all. None of it exploded at once. Instead, it accumulated slowly, like pressure building beneath a sealed surface. By the early 2000s, Melinda was no longer just Bill's partner in philanthropy. She was a global figure in her own right, advocating openly for women's autonomy, safety, and dignity. That public mission sharpened her private awareness. The more she spoke about accountability and respect, the harder it became to ignore contradictions inside her own marriage. Those contradictions reached a breaking point in September 2013. In September 2013, Melinda accompanied Bill Gates to a townhouse in New York City owned by Jeffrey Epstein, a man who had already been convicted of sex crimes involving minors. The visit took place on the same day they were receiving a public service award at the Pierre Hotel, a moment meant to celebrate their charitable work. Instead, it became one of the most disturbing experiences of Melinda's life. She later described feeling physically ill during the meeting, a visceral reaction that she could not rationalize away. Epstein, she said, felt like evil personified, and from the moment she stepped inside, she knew something was deeply wrong. When the meeting ended, she made her position clear. She wanted nothing to do with Epstein, and she expected that relationship to end immediately. What shocked her was learning that it did not. As she later discovered, Bill continued to meet with Epstein even after that encounter, a revelation that ignited fury, fear, and a profound sense of betrayal. For Melinda, this was not simply about poor judgment. It was about boundaries, values, and safety. Epstein represented everything she stood against, and the fact that her husband maintained contact with him shattered whatever trust still remained intact. Bill would later publicly admit that meeting Epstein was a huge mistake, but for Melinda, the damage was already done. Trust does not collapse loudly. It erodes quietly, and by the time apologies arrive, it is often too late. Accountability comes home. As the years passed, Melinda's tolerance for secrecy and quiet resolution diminished. In 2017, a woman who worked at a bicycle shop connected to a firm tied to the Gates family accused Bill's longtime money manager, Michael Larson, of sexual harassment. Bill initially attempted to resolve the situation privately, but Melinda intervened and demanded an independent investigation by an outside law firm. The woman ultimately signed a settlement and a non-disclosure agreement, but Melinda was not satisfied with silence. She pushed for deeper scrutiny of Cascade Investments, the secretive firm that managed Bill's fortune. Larson denied wrongdoing, but the episode marked a clear shift in Melinda's approach. She was no longer willing to absorb discomfort quietly in order to preserve appearances. Then, in 2019, another reckoning surfaced. Microsoft's board launched an investigation into an alleged relationship between Bill and a female engineer that had begun years earlier while he was still chairman. Outside lawyers were hired, and Microsoft later confirmed that Bill had sought a relationship with the employee. In March 2020, Bill stepped down from the board, publicly stating that he wanted to focus on philanthropy, though people close to the situation said the investigation played a significant role in that decision. The timing was impossible to ignore. The allegations emerged during the height of the Me Too movement, and they cracked the carefully maintained image of the disciplined engineer philanthropist. For Melinda, the investigation confirmed what she had been grappling with privately for years. The public mission she carried and the private reality she lived were no longer compatible. While headlines focused on Bill, Melinda carried the emotional weight quietly. She continued traveling, speaking, and leading, even as anxiety crept into her private life. She later described experiencing panic attacks and recurring nightmares, symptoms that reflected how deeply the strain had embedded itself. Therapy became a lifeline, offering a space where she could examine betrayal without betraying herself. In April 2019, she published her book, The Moment of Lift, which told stories from her travels and argued that lifting up women was the fastest way to lift up societies. On the surface, the book read like a confident manifesto for equality. Beneath it, the writing process forced her to confront how much of herself she had set aside in service of the marriage and the foundation. Later that same year, during a trip to New Mexico, the pressure finally broke through. Friends later described the episode as a waking nightmare, a moment when the emotional strain became impossible to ignore. When she returned, Melinda began serious divorce discussions, quietly separating from Bill while attorneys and advisors worked behind the scenes. The separation remained private for more than a year, walking away from the world's most powerful marriage. In May 2021, the truth finally became public. After 27 years of marriage and 3 children, Melinda and Bill Gates announced that their relationship was irretrievably broken. The news stunned the world, but for Melinda, the decision had already been made long before. Reports later revealed that she had consulted divorce attorneys as early as October 2019, shortly after new stories about Epstein resurfaced. In August 2021, the divorce was finalized, with Melinda believed to have received assets worth approximately $76 billion, placing the split among the most expensive divorces in history. Soon after, she pledged $1 billion over 2 years toward women's health and empowerment, signaling that her independence would not be quiet or passive. In interviews that followed, she spoke openly about infidelity, broken trust, and the emotional cost of standing beside one of the most powerful men in the world while losing herself in the process. She described therapy as the tool that helped her rebuild her identity and respond to betrayal without abandoning her values. Her honesty resonated widely, especially with women who recognized versions of their own stories in hers. In May 2024, Melinda took another decisive step. She left the Gates Foundation entirely, walking away from the institution she had helped build for more than 2 decades. Bill became sole chair, while Melinda committed to directing at least $1 billion into projects focused on women and girls through her own ventures. For the first time in decades, her platform was entirely her own, redefining power on her own terms. After the divorce became public, many expected Melinda French Gates to retreat, to soften her presence, or to fade quietly into the background of extraordinary wealth. But instead, she did the opposite. She began to speak, not in the language of scandal or accusation, but in the language of boundaries, truth, and self-preservation, reframing her story as one of agency rather than loss. Freed from the weight of protecting a shared image, Melinda focused fully on the mission that had been pulling at her for years. Through pivotal ventures, she expanded investments in organizations working on women's economic security, mental health, caregiving, political participation, and media representation, guided by a belief she repeated often, that when women gain power, families and communities move forward faster and more sustainably. By the mid-2020s, Pivotal had backed hundreds of millions of dollars in more than 150 organizations, many of them led by women who had long been excluded from traditional funding pipelines. Her separation from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in May 2024 marked another decisive turning point. For more than 20 years, she had helped build and guide the institution that reshaped global philanthropy. Yet stepping away from it was not an act of retreat. It was an act of alignment. She explained that leaving allowed her to focus her time, resources, and voice more directly on women and girls, without compromise or internal conflict. It also sent a quiet but powerful message about ownership, that even the most influential platforms must still align with personal values to remain sustainable. In April 2025, Melinda released her memoir, The Next Day, a title that reflected both grief and renewal. In it, she wrote candidly about panic attacks, nightmares, therapy, and the slow realization that honesty is not optional in intimate relationships. She explained that trust cannot exist alongside secrecy, and that staying silent too long had cost her pieces of herself she had to deliberately reclaim. The book was not a reckoning aimed outward, but an excavation inward, and readers responded to its restraint as much as its honesty. That same spring, she appeared on national television and spoke plainly about her decision to leave the marriage, saying that without honesty, intimacy becomes impossible, and that therapy taught her how to respond to betrayal without betraying herself. She also confirmed that she was happy again, grounded, and in a relationship that reflected the mutual respect she had worked so long to restore within herself. By the mid-2020s, her financial picture remained immense, with an estimated net worth in the tens of billions, much of it already committed directly or indirectly to causes aimed at reducing inequality and strengthening women's autonomy. But wealth was no longer the most defining aspect of her story. The defining choice was the one she made when she decided that power without integrity was not worth keeping. Looking back, the arc becomes clear. The disciplined child who painted apartments and balanced ledgers grew into a technologist who shipped software quietly, then into a philanthropist who learned that systems only work when values are enforced, and finally, into a woman who chose herself when silence became too expensive. Her departure from a marriage, a foundation, and a shared public identity was not an escape from responsibility. It was the ultimate expression of it. Melinda French Gates did not walk away impulsively. She walked away prepared, grounded, and certain. And in doing so, she redefined what strength looks like when it no longer needs permission, applause, or protection. If this story gave you a new perspective, let us know in the comments. For more powerful, real-life stories like this, subscribe and stay with us.